People who have died and come back to life. What did you see? Story 1. I was 12, she was only 38. She had pancreatic cancer, one of the most violent ones. It was an unexpected diagnosis for her age. By the end of it, she had a morphine pump in her chest and would drift to sleep sitting up in her wheelchair, so she needed to be strapped in. It's horrible how quickly it can eat you away. I wasn't there, but I'm told by everyone who was that she woke up from her sleep, looked up at my grandmother, smiled and said, "I have to go." Then she was gone. The last thing my mom wanted to do was die because she wanted to be with me and my sisters more than anything. We were truly her world. Even if we don't meet again, all I could ever hope for is that she has that feeling forever. Her life was hard and short, but she deserved everything. Story 2. Not me, but a close friend and coworker. He got T-boned by a car while on his motorcycle, severed his femoral artery, completely exsanguinated by the time we arrived. I'm a fire and rescue. Got him flown out to the nearest hospital. He was completely drained of blood for about 30 minutes, dead for about 20. Doctors were able to get blood back in and his heart pumping, and he's alive and well today. Before the accident, he was, I guess, an atheist. Had never thought of or mentioned religion. He said he walked through a forest with Jesus for a couple days, talked about anything and everything like old friends. Finally, he said, "How'd I get to heaven? I never was religious." Jesus said, "I know. That's why you're going back." And he woke up. The man changed 180 degrees and is a devout Christian now. Story 3. Nursing in the ICU. We've had people try to die on us many times during the years, some successfully. One guy stood out to me. His heart stopped. We called a code or working on him, and suddenly he comes to. We hadn't vented him yet, so he was able to talk, and he started screaming, "Don't let them take me! Don't let them take me! They're coming!" He was scared and yelling. Then he yelled a little more. As we tried to calm him down, he screamed, "No, no!" and gestured toward the end of the bed and died again. We didn't get him back. It was seriously creepy. We called his son to tell him the news, and the son said basically, "Good." He was a SOB. All right, so I guess I spoke too soon. Story 4. Overwhelming peace and happiness. A bright, airy, and floating feeling. And I live a very stressful life. Imagine finding out the person you've had a crush on reveals they have the same feelings for you, and then you win the lotto later that day. That was the feeling I had. I never feared death afterwards, and I'm relieved when I hear of people dying after suffering with an illness. Story 5. At the end of one semester in college, I collapsed in the bathroom due to exhaustion after being up for around 72 hours. I hit my head on the sink, then the toilet, then the ground. When completely lights out for a split second, then next thing I was aware of a loud buzzing sound and looking up at 3 fat, blue, sentient, alien toad shaman sort of beings standing over me looking disappointed or contemptuous or something. They each gave each other a look that reminds me of like how humans roll their eyes. Then the one in the center took this rod jar staff thing and shoved it in me and felt like an electric shock. I woke up to my girlfriend doing chest compressions. Never seen anyone so scared before. I'm not sure if I was clinically dead, but she thought I had died. Story 6. Not me, but someone I know as a kid was gone for a bit during surgery. He said he saw a car driving outside carrying a coffin with signs that it was some high-profile politician who was actually alive at the moment. He came to told his parents and the doctors, but no one believed him. 2 weeks later, that politician died and was carried in the same car he saw on the same street just outside the hospital. So I guess he saw the future while briefly dead. Story 7. I've posted this before, but I always like to chime in on these kinds of threads. This near-death count, I had a blood pressure of 60/40 and a 104-degree plus fever and was out of consciousness for a solid 3 days in critical care unit in 2005, after I contracted bacterial endocarditis as a result of low immunity and a heart defect. I spent those days floating above my hospital bed, looking down at the room my body nurses checking on me visitors. When I came to days later, I could recount exactly who had been to visit me, who had stayed the night in the room with me, and conversations they had between each other while I was out. While I was floating, it was warm, and there was no pain, not even gravity, to hold my limbs down. Although I knew that was my body below me with all the tubes and wires coming out of it, I was at peace with the situation. All of my anxieties were gone. There was no tunnel of light or dead family, just me attached to my physical body, by a thin silver ethereal cord in a state of total bliss. Edit. Switch diastolic and systolic. I was around 60-40 when I lost consciousness before my near-death experience. Story 8. My dad's heart stopped when he had a heart attack and he had to be brought back to life. He kept the paper copy of the heart monitor which shows he flatlined. He said he felt an overwhelming sensation of peace, like nothing he had felt before. Story 9. My grandmother was near death for months. All the hospice nurses and us family were amazed at how she was still mentally sharp and hanging on overall. But for all those months, she kept telling me how she was having these horrible dreams of people at the foot of her bed. She didn't see their faces. They were just figures. Sometimes they would grab at her and want to take her somewhere. Sometimes she would ask them questions, but they wouldn't answer. She became afraid of going to sleep, so I'd often stay with her so she could hold my hand if she got scared. All her hospice nurses said that seeing people or a patient talking about taking a trip was common, but usually these figures brought on a sense of peace. But my grandmother was genuinely terrified of the figures. I always wonder if she's okay. Story 10. My great-grandmother saw her dead relatives around for a week or two before she died and would chat to someone at nights. On the morning she died, her daughter was next to her. She was pointing at a nice lady in the corner of the room. So not anyone she recognized, and she used a respectful form of madam to refer to her. Said, "Madam, take my hand." Her last words were to her daughter, "Pass me my coat, I'm leaving." Story 11. My sister died and said it was extremely peaceful. She said it was very loud like a train station and lots of talking. And she was stuck at this area that was like a curtain with lots of beautiful colors, colors that you don't see in real life according to her. A man told her he was sorry, but she had to go back as it wasn't her time. Story 12. Not my story, but I think about it a lot. Years ago, I knew a guy who was working at a theater in New York in the 90s. Someone broke in to rob the place and stabbed him in the neck. If I remember, he was clinically dead, or something like 9 minutes before being resuscitated. He told me he felt his consciousness slip into an alternate universe where he didn't die, that he did not make it in his original world and now lives here. You could chalk that up to a lot of things, of course. But the eeriest part was his absolute and almost casual surety of it. When I asked a follow-up, it wasn't a matter of, "That's what I believe." It was, "That's what happened." I often find myself wondering if any of us ever really die, and we're not just falling through the multiverse. That's usually a post-weed edible musing. Story 13. Didn't see but heard a voice that sounded at best description like a really angry howling wind yelling at me that it wasn't my time yet. Scared the crap out of me, and I can still hear it like it happened yesterday. Mind you, I had tried to unalive myself in the hall closet of my apartment in 2017 after my ex-fiancé passed by, taking his own life 2 states away. Nobody else in the house except for a dog. I woke up in my bedroom 2 rooms away, covered up with a blanket from the living room. Also 2 rooms opposite. Story 14. I was in the hospital when it happened and I died for a few seconds. Maybe up to 30 seconds. I don't remember how long exactly. This was over a decade ago. I was brought back with adrenaline. All I can remember is seeing a stone slab and hearing something like a wall crumbling. I don't know how else to explain it. It was a plain square-edged stone slab, and I couldn't or don't remember seeing the other side of it. It was enormous from what I gather. It might have stood 4 feet tall. I don't recall seeing anything else other than this gray stone slab and hearing that sound. It was an instant of time to me. Edit. It wasn't a door, it was a platform. There was no one standing on it. There were no other people. Story 15. I was in a gray fog with a girl who looked a lot like a young version of my grandmother, who was still alive but dressed like a pioneer in the 1800s. She didn't say anything, but kept pulling me towards an opening in the wall. I kept refusing to go because I was so tired. I finally got tired of her nagging and went, and that's when I came to. I had bled out during a C-section, and my heart could not beat without blood. They had to deliver the baby sew up the bleeders, refill me with blood before they could restart my heart. So like at least 12 minutes gone. Story 16. My sister, around 6 years of age at the time, drowned at our local pool. Basically, when she was recovered from the water, she had no pulse and was very blue. Also wouldn't spit out water after the rescuers did basic life support and mouth-to-mouth. She was brought to a nearby hospital that saved her life. While in the hospital, our aunt was talking with her, asked her if she remembered anything while she was unconscious. She was unconscious for probably 2 days. She said she saw a white place with two figures waiting for her around 10 meters ahead. When she went near, one of the figures looked like a person wearing a Jabberwocky mask, and the other looked like a Guy Fawkes mask but black. The Jabberwocky said to her that she could go on ahead if she liked the ambiance of the place, but the Guy Fawkes one said she could go back home, as her time is still not yet up. She then took the Guy Fawkes advice, and when she woke up, she was already there in the hospital. Still confused if that was legit or just imaginative ramblings of a preschool kid, it happened nearly 20 years ago. I was 8 years old at that time and probably missed some small details, but that's all the gist of her story. Story 17. As a young man, I went to war. I got bitten by a spider or something on my foot, and it got infected and swelled up twice the size. Couldn't even get into a flip-flop. Bad fever, too. One moment I was sitting on my bunk in Iraq, and the next moment I woke up in a hospital in the United States 4 months later. If you've ever had surgery or been under general anesthesia, it was like that. No feeling of passage of time. Just blipped over one moment right to the next. It was very confusing not remembering September to January. I was told I was badly injured in an explosion that November and had been in a coma. Right as I was coming to terms with this, getting more information about my friends, I found myself back in Iraq back to September. Blip. I took it as kind of a premonition. It actually reduced my anxiety about upcoming missions because I knew I'd live through them. But it didn't come true and I never got blown up, thankfully. Years later, I read Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, and something similar happens there too. I'm convinced Vonnegut experienced the same thing when he too was a young man at war. While most would attribute this to a literal fever dream, it was like my soul left and found a place in another available version of me. It's not something I think about often because it was so strange and so real, but I think that version of me exists or existed someplace else. I hope he found his way back too. Story 18. My spouse was dead for a couple of minutes one miserable night. She maintains that she saw nothing but only heard people talking about her like through a wall. The only thing she remembers for absolute certain was begging an ER nurse that she didn't want to die. She's quite alive and well today. Story 19. I had a heart surgery with a near-death experience, for me at least. Well, the possibility that those effects are caused by morphine is also there. I just saw black and nothing else, but it was warm and I had such inner peace. It's weird as I sometimes still think about it and wish this feeling of being so light and free again. Story 20. When I had my near-death experience, I had awful delusions and hallucinations. I can see why some people really believe they'd seen hell. I see it as just my consciousness breaking down toward the end and showing me my fears. I never actually died, but I was basically dead on an operating table. It felt evil and full of fear. I wish I got those ones where it's peaceful and I see relatives. I was in straight-up fear the whole time, and I can't place the timeline or exactly what I saw. I don't know how long it lasted or when it began or stopped. Story 21. I have a near-death one. My grandmother in Mexico is old and she was in the hospital getting treated for dementia. We were with her and she was not remembering anything. Then out of nowhere, she looks at the door window and stares. She tells the door in Spanish, "No, not me, not yet. Get the girl in the next room instead. I'm not going." Next thing you know, there's a code in the next room and the girl died sometime later. We didn't know who were in the rooms around us. We think she saw La Muerte, essentially the Grim Reaper in Mexican culture, and then she was back to her dementia self. Crazy. Story 22. I believe I died and came back once. I don't remember anything. I bled so bad and was alone 13 hours. I lost consciousness. When my family found me, I had already woke up. The EMTs said they had no idea how I lived. I had so much blood loss. My daughter was with some friends. She was too. They said earlier that day she gazed up and pointed, saying, "There's Mommy, go get her." I remember no NDE. I think I wasn't supposed to remember. Story 23. I did see a white light, and then I was on my old bed, and the sun was shining through the window. I felt very at peace, but something clicked in my brain that it wasn't real. I woke up on the floor and the teacher had resuscitated me. She wasn't a naturally pretty woman, But when I woke up, I remember everything being bathed in a kind of golden light. And in that moment, I thought she was an angel. Story 24, didn't die, but have had a few near-death experiences. Last one was on my motorcycle. During my motorcycle endorsement class, my instructor was an old kind of gruff but very nice Harley rider. I really respected him because he was passionate about riding and wasn't afraid to tell you exactly how it is. One of the last days on the course, he told everyone in the class that when you go through something traumatic, you might see your life flash before your eyes. He described it like watching a slideshow of your life, only at 100 times speed. He said the reason it happens is that your mind is working as fast as it can to try to remember something to get you out of the situation you're in. It had happened to him once, right before he crashed years ago. Flash forward a couple months, and I'm riding my motorcycle to school. The road I'm on is 5 lanes one way with light traffic in an urban area. Woodward Avenue for all my MI peeps. The speed limit is 50 mph, but has stoplights about every quarter mile. I'm running a bit late and riding a bit too fast, but I took that class seriously and was checking my mirrors, was aware of my surroundings, all that good stuff. I go to pass a car on the left when I notice a truck passing the same car on the right. There's a wide turn a little ways ahead, and at the time I decided to pass. I could still see the road in front of me, quite ahead. The truck and I are going about the same speed. I speed up a little bit so I can get around the car in front of me and stay in front of the truck so he can see me overtake the car in front of me, and I don't wind up in his blind spot. I look over to the truck, who's now speeding up as well, still going the same speed as me. This is where I effed up. Instead of slowing down, I, being an ego-driven 20-year-old, decided to speed up further. Truck speeds up too. F you, Mr. Truck, I'm passing you. All of a sudden, the truck slows down. I look forward to see the wide turn ended, and there's a red light about 50 yards out with cars stopped, and I'm pushing 70 mph. I immediately hit both front and rear brakes, but went too hard on the rear. Time slows down, and I see my foot moving forward and backward, but my feet are glued to the pegs. I'm fishtailing. That's when my life flashes backwards, exactly how my instructor described. My mind stops at me taking the course where we were practicing hard stops. Instructor told me I used too much rear brake in my stops, and that if I ever fishtail, to slowly let off the back brake and calmly squeeze the front brake. Snap back to reality, and I do exactly that. I can't stop in time, but with sheer luck, squeeze between the lanes side by side with the cars in front of me. Get some weird looks from the drivers on both sides of me, but I'm relieved to not be flying through their back windshield. Walt, if you're reading this, you saved my life. I cannot thank you enough. Story 25, died 3 times in 3 hours. Landed someplace different each time. Knew I was dead but existed. Remembered the past. All 3 times was very different, very real, and seemed to last a while. I was out 24 seconds, 39 seconds, 70 seconds. In lengths. Not sure if I would have stayed there. Don't know, but it changed my whole perspective. Story 26. This thread really makes me feel relief as I'm fighting cancer now, but don't know if I'll make it. I'm not scared of dying, but I'm sad thinking of leaving my 3 young kids behind. I'm only 39, and my youngest is still 10. My oldest is 16. It's really sad for everyone now. Hopefully I can die peacefully and show my family everything is going to be all right. Story 27. I lost my dad to self-unaliving in 2021 after he battled a few years of terminal illness, and I often wonder how he would have felt if he was at peace. Reading these stories brings me great comfort. Thank you for sharing. A couple of months after he passed, I had a vivid dream where I was driving, and he came to see me to tell me he was doing okay. Afterwards, I dropped him back off into a dark void. I also have a particular smell that comes up every now and then that I associate with my godmother who passed away when I was younger. That smell was present at my dad's memorial. Little things like that and the dreams definitely make me believe that our loved ones who have passed are around us in some form. Story 728. I died for 7 minutes back in March. While I was in the hospital for shortness of breath, I had a bad lung hemorrhage. I lost so much blood that my heart had none to pump. I went into cardiac arrest and a code blue was issued. It took the doctor 7 minutes to get my heart started again. During that time, I had a stroke due to the lack of oxygen to my brain. I woke up inhibited and only semi-conscious for 2 days, then fully regained consciousness and asked, "What happened?" It is hard to correlate inner time to what was happening outside, but I can make some sense of it. I saw a series of three oval ellipses, one at a time, just suspended in a black space. The ellipses were all upright, as though they were suspended by a string, but they weren't. And they all had a thickness to them, like a ring. On the inner and outer surfaces of the first ellipse, I saw mountains, streams, forests, and clouds. They were beautiful at first, but then they began to sour as their colors took on a yellow tinge. It faded away and was replaced by a second ellipse that was a hot ring of iron, so hot that pieces of iron were slowly crumbling from it. I could smell the iron as the ring slowly disintegrated as it cooled into blackness. A nurse later told me that this is what blood smells like. I now take it that this is when I was in cardiac arrest. Suddenly, the scene brightened to reveal the third ellipse that was covered with beautiful clouds that were light pink and blue, like from the most beautiful sunrise or sunset. That, I believe, is when my heart started beating again. When I regained conscious, those three ellipses remained firmly fixed in my memory. When I was told days later about my cardiac arrest and stroke, it all began to make sense to me. I even think I know the source of those images. I'm an astronomer and had been studying Johannes Kepler's Astronomica Nova and trying to understand how Kepler figured out that the orbits of the planets are ellipses and not circles. It had been on my mind for weeks, and when I hemorrhaged, my dying brain latched on to that shape. The initial and final ellipses were adorned with what I value most: the beauty of our planet, the outdoors and sky. The yellowing of the initial ellipse reflected my dying brain, and the second ellipse was my brain's interpretation of the smell of blood as I faded away. The third ellipse when I began breathing and returning to life. That's all I saw. No tunnel of light or happy deceased family members welcoming me. I think that dreaming dying reflects what happens to be most accessible in your mind during that time. Your mind tells you a story about it. I was never afraid during my ordeal. I was just a dispassionate observer. Amazingly, the only lasting effects of my 7 minutes of code blue is a slightly diminished capacity of my short-term memory. I learned something from all this. I'm sure I was a horrific sight to anyone outside, covered with blood, as doctors crowded around me trying to pull me back to life. But inside all was calm. No pain, no discomfort, no worries. Accidents and disease may be terribly painful, but dying is easy. I'm not scared of dying, not in the least. Afraid of what comes before, sure, but nature makes dying easy. Story 29. I was laying on the operating table. The beeping of the machine slowly faded away, and the room plunged into darkness. I could feel myself drifting away from my body, an eerie sensation of weightlessness enveloping me. Suddenly, I found myself in a realm of vibrant colors and swirling mist. There I met a council of beings made entirely of light, each radiating a different hue. They communicated with me not through words, but through pure thoughts and emotions. They showed me the history of the universe, from the birth of stars to the formation of galaxies in the blink of an eye. But the most astonishing part was when they presented me with a choice to return to my earthly life or explore the mysteries of the cosmos. I was tempted by the unknown, but the thought of my family brought me back. With their guidance, I descended through the tunnel of swirling energy and woke up in the operating room gasping for breath. I can't fully explain the overwhelming sensations I experienced during that journey, but I know that there's more to existence than meets the eye. It's a story that still haunts me to this day, a glimpse into the world beyond our understanding. Story 30. My closest family members in front of a house with a white picket fence. In real life, some of these people were dead, some still alive. When I was brought to, I had no idea what was going on, and I felt like I was waking up from an incredibly deep dream. It took me a few moments to realize that a few people I loved weren't still alive, and that's when I fully regained consciousness and awareness that I was in a hospital with tubes down my throat. Story 31. I fell 30 feet free rock climbing in a quarry when I was 22. For clarification, free climbing uses no ropes and traditional climbing gear. I used to do this as a teen on occasion, so wasn't really concerned until my hands gave out. This was also the day I discovered I had carpal tunnel. As I was falling, I felt really calm, like, oh, I guess this is my time. Time slowed. I accepted my death. I looked at the clouds and was just calm. I felt hands on my shirt seam at my shoulders, and they yanked me towards the sky. The moment I felt that, I blacked out. Apparently, my friends at the base of the rock said I threw my hands behind my head and power kicked the wall. I remember none of this. All I remember was feeling this overwhelming sense of calm and being held. When I woke up on the ground, the first thing I saw was a pointy boulder. The quarry was full of stones, but the larger ones were closer to the rock wall itself. The smaller ones, the further you went away from it. I was fortunate to kick the wall hard enough I barely landed on the smaller section of rocks. When I looked at that pointy boulder, I had the chills. The only thing I could think in my head was, that's a perfect rock for a coconut. I managed to army crawl to a better spot and wait for EMT support. Unfortunately, the ambulance couldn't reach me, so they had to take the gurney onto an EMT's personal truck and get me to the ambulance that way. The only reason I wasn't life-flighted was because I was fortunate to be conscious, and there was another person in need who wasn't. Fast forward to the hospital. I arrive in the ambulance. The first two wheels of my gurney make it down okay. The second two wheels, I see black. I just hear things. It wasn't until after I realized at this moment I went into adrenaline shock. Pretty sure they dropped me, but can't confirm. Was taken to a trauma room and swarmed by an A-team trauma unit. It was like I was in one of those hospital TV shows. Like, wow, it really is this crazy in here. I remember only bits and pieces because I continued to go in and out of adrenaline shock. I felt really bad, and I think I upset the doctor, and they wouldn't tell me why, because they aren't allowed to tell you what you do under duress of adrenaline shock for the sake of your mental health, which just confused me even more. I profusely apologized and thanked everyone I could see. I ended up having a fractured L2. No surgery required, no other injuries aside from arthritis from the impact. I now have fibromyalgia, which may or may not be attributed to the incident, but it's not the only near-death incident I've had. But who knows, I did have a weird sense of survivor's guilt after the incident, though. The calm I felt while falling was surreal. Unattainable on this earth, surreal. I knew surviving would mean I would never feel that type of calm or peace again until I moved on to wherever we go next. It really had me feeling quite screwed up because even the best of feels here couldn't compare. Looking back, I'm still not sure what happened. Maybe a DMT trip from my own brain because I was positive I was going to die. I'm not sure. For context, I'm not of a particular religious following. I have spiritual beliefs, but not entirely defined. I feel like there's a little truth hidden in all religions, and nobody knows the full truth. We're all just guessing at our own interpretations, and that's all we can do until we die. Story 32. Appendicitis nearly got me 5 years ago. While they were scrambling for a team to do surgery, I suddenly found myself in my living room quietly knitting. No more pain, no more hospital noises, just my home. This was no dream vision of my living room either. This was that weird stain on the wall that I can't seem to clean, and the threadbare arms on the couch, the smell of the candle on the coffee table. I could feel the yarn in my hands and on my needles, and I managed to do a couple rounds before I looked over and saw my grandfather standing by the hearth. I was thrilled to see him since I hadn't in so long, but then I realized he had been dead 2 years. I told him that I knew he was dead, and now I'm pretty sure I'm in trouble because I'm dead too, but I wasn't supposed to be. He just smiled and said, "It'll be okay, baby." For some reason I said, "That's just the way it is," and then slammed back into my body in the hospital. Story 33. Not me, but my coworker had a massive heart attack and died for a few moments. He had made it to the hospital, so he survived. I asked him what it was like, and he said it was like nothing. One moment he was talking to a nurse, and then everything was just black. He said he woke up a few moments later and didn't even know what had happened as the nurses worked on him. I find this to be really comforting, to be honest, than not being aware that you died a bit. Story 34. At first it felt like going underwater. Everyone's voices were just senseless noise and it felt heavy. I was certain I was dying, but it was the most amazing feeling. I'd compare it to how heroin users explain their first high. It also made me act really odd after I came to, singing songs and laughing, trying to get out of bed to dance. I don't remember that part so well. Story 35. When my mother was little, around 6, she jumped in the lake and drowned. My grandfather pulled her out and did CPR and brought her back. She saw her great-grandmother, whom she only knew in pictures. In life, her great-grandmother was wheelchair-bound from an accident that broke her spine. But my mom saw her walking toward her, telling her she had to go back. Mom said it was sunny and warm, and she didn't want to go. Story 36, I had a line-of-duty injury in 2015 and had a sudden respiratory arrest leading to cardiac arrest and multiple days on a ventilator. I wound up inside an old movie rental store that we went to as a kid. It was the place my dad took us the day they told us my mom had cancer. We were restoring an old Bronco, and it broke down, leaving us stranded with our Chinese food and movies until she came and got us. This time it was empty and dark. Bugs on the carpet, shelves empty, but the TVs were still playing those old previews they used to show. There was an emergency exit door complete with an alarm sound, and through the window shone the brightest light imaginable. I thought about going out the door, but was so tired, so I lay down on the floor instead. I watched the previews for a while, was strangely comfortable, and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was intubated in the ICU. That was 8 years ago, next June. I just remember feeling warm. So much so, it felt like every inch of my body was wrapped in a fuzzy, warm blanket and safe. I could leave or I could stay, and I still wonder what was beyond that door. Edited to add, I just remembered that the store also had the same large window front, and that the night outside was exactly the same, complete, with broken down Bronco waiting outside. Never went near the front door though, just the emergency exit with the bright light shining through the window. And when I was diagnosed with a large pelvic tumor this year, I found a membership card from the video store at my parents' house. It now lives on a shelf in my living room. I beat death again, and I'll always have that card to remind me. Story 37. Lots of hallucinations. Sort of demonic. There was a lot of pain and darkness. Somehow it didn't seem real. More like a waking nightmare. I don't know how long it lasted. Then I experienced relief that it was over, and the pain left. There is a bright light, but no tunnel or such. I came back to more normal hallucinations once they fixed me. Leading up to this event, I was also hallucinating. I vividly remember the room looking like it was flooded with water down to fish. I was also delusional and rambled. My family had to say goodbye to me over the phone. Nobody thought I would live. Spent a week in pulmonary ICU to recover. Was absolutely horrible. Would not do again. Story 38. Not a confirmed death experience. This will take a minute, but let me explain. I used to have extremely, insanely vivid dreams that started in 2016. Everything that occurred in those dreams truly 100% felt like reality. I was suspected to have sleep apnea, so I had a home test done for it. During that night, I had a dream that I was in pastel, airy clouds on a soft, transparent platform. I was sitting on the edge with an overwhelming sense of happiness. I felt safe. I vividly remember hearing a voice say in a reassuring tone say to me, "Go ahead, fall into the clouds. You're okay." I did just that, and an absolutely overwhelming feeling of peace rushed over me as I closed my eyes in those clouds. I woke up drenched in sweat and in insane panic. I found out the very next day that my oxygen levels dipped into the 60s for 2 minutes, and during that time I began to go into ventricular tachycardia. It wasn't confirmed I died, but they said I came very close, and I was actually admitted to the hospital that day to observe me and run further tests. I was there almost 5 days. I truly think I died that night for a few minutes, and if I didn't, I'm still incredibly lucky to have survived ventricular tachycardia and that degree of hypoxemia. I'm no longer afraid of death, but the fear of the journey to death still spooks me. Thank you for reading if you got this far. Story 39. I almost died from a self-unaliving attempt. I was completely blacked out for almost 3 days. I just remember falling out of consciousness, and suddenly there were 2 young nurses trying to put a catheter in me while my mom was feeding me orange jello. It was like I had blinked and 3 days were gone. I didn't see crap, although I almost went through organ failure. How they saved my liver, I may never know. Story 40. Oh boy, where to begin? What you are isn't separate from everything else. Everything that is and everything that isn't in a physical form. You are all of everything. One manifestation looks like I to you, but isn't any real kind of I. You set up human views and standards of every kind, but they're all just another facet of it. None of them are meaningful in the ultimate sense. And my oh my, is it significant? All. Story 41, I full-on died twice, and both times I went to the same place. It was dark, but not because there was no light, but because there was no sight. There's no physical components that we have in our reality. like it's entirely outside of the third, fourth, or fifth dimension. The closest I can explain it is this. I was a drop of water, as were all other souls. We were all a pool, and at the edge of our pool was an ocean of other drops. We were all the same and all different. We could fuse consciousness and disengage and be autonomous. It was the feeling of being all and one all at the same time. There was someone telling me something as I was back too early, and suddenly I was whooshed back into physical reality. Coming back to the third dimension hurt a lot. I called the place home water when I was young, and I've missed it. Story 42. Reading all these stories made me quite emotional. I'm an atheist through and do not believe in any form of afterlife whatsoever. I lost my best friend to self-unaliving a couple months ago. He was fighting with his depression for years and had multiple failed attempts before. One thought that crosses my mind almost every day is if he was happy with his decision in his last moments or not. Was he scared? Did he regret it in panic, trying to prevent the inevitable? All I wish is that he finally felt the relief he was looking for all those years. Finally not feeling like crap. Finally being at peace with himself. Reading these stories gave me some kind of hope that he did find that peace. And while his illness made him do it, these few seconds of peace made it worth it for him. I also thought of maybe seeing him one last time in my final moments, even though I don't believe in the afterlife. Story 43. I don't exactly die, but I suffer from partial seizures. Not bothered. So I don't drop to the floor and spasm everywhere. I just lose consciousness and go blank. One minute I'm there, the next I'm not before coming back. There's nothing there. There's just being there with your eyes closed for the rest of time. Things are just finished. You're just not there. Then I guess coming back to life is when I regain consciousness and realize what happened a while later. Not remember what happened during it, just know how it happened. It's not enjoying a cool dream that's being knocked out by some jerk in the pub. You're just dead. Story 44. When I was 10 years old, I was bitten by a snake and had to be flown by a helicopter to the closest city for emergency treatment. I didn't die, but when my dad was carrying me frantically to the closest shop to call an ambulance, I passed out. I did see the whole tunnel of light thing. In the tunnel was my mother's voice. My mother passed when I was 1 year old, beckoning me to join her. It honestly felt warm and peaceful. Really nice, actually. But when I realized what it represented, I screamed out, "No, I don't want to go yet," and woke up with a jolt. We arrived at the ambulance not too long after, and then all the medical staff was constantly keeping me awake and not letting me sleep. It was so annoying. I rudely told them to just leave me alone and let me sleep already. Of course they didn't listen. Now thinking back, I still feel guilty that I was so rude to them and never thanked them for saving my life. Also, I'm pretty sure the tunnel of light and my mother's voice was just a figment of my imagination. Story 45, I've mentioned this before, but I had a near-death experience during childbirth. I lost a significant amount of blood and was being rushed to have a hypersectomy when my body finally started clotting, and I came to. I believe they also gave me some type of adrenaline. Anyways, it felt very, very peaceful. Everything around me got bright white and I couldn't really hear anything. I just felt very happy and at peace. No worries at all. Very surreal moment that kind of helped me get over the fear of death. I don't know why my body wanted to come back. I was fully accepting whatever was happening to me, but I'm glad I'm here with my son. Story 46. I overdosed on copious amounts of meth when I was 17. I remember bits and pieces like the guy I was with taking my clothes off and pushing my head out the window and telling me to puke. Then I was watching the whole scene unfold from the ceiling. Me naked in bed, him slapping me and trying to make me throw up. Just watching. I wasn't scared, I was more inquisitive. Like, this might be it. I don't remember anything after that until I came to. My brain was absolutely fried for like 3 days. I couldn't function, couldn't sleep, and could hardly talk. Don't do drugs, kids. Story 47. I haven't had an NDE, but I was an ER nurse or flight nurse for a decade. I've been present for many deaths. Let me say I don't believe in the supernatural. I'm an atheist. But I'll swear till my dying day that I've seen the angel of death twice hovering over a patient during a code. Probably exhaustion and lack of food because we rarely get a chance to take any kind of break. But I tell you twice I've seen the angel of death in a trauma room, and he nodded at me. Not Sharon, but clothed in black, with a face like any person you'd see walking down the street. Never seen it since I stopped trauma nursing. And really don't want to, again for a while. But I've got this feeling I'll get that nod again, but he'll be over me nodding at another nurse. Story 48. I always get into these comments way too late, but I'll tell it regardless. I have sick sinus syndrome. That means my heart gets out of sync and stops beating. Then my body convulses and my heart starts again, and it looks like a seizure. When I go to the hospital after no test reveals what's actually happening, but then one Saturday I felt dizzy again, and my girlfriend drove me to the hospital and I flatlined on the hospital bed a couple more times. And they realized that my heart was stopping. Now I have a pacemaker. Now what does it feel like when I was dead for a few minutes at a time? It was just black. I have no memory of it at all. In fact, it was very easy to do. I always say dying is very easy, but coming back is very difficult because coming back is when all the blood rushes back to your brain. And it's like having 1,000 dreams at once. It's very overwhelming, and usually when I come back, I'm screaming because it's so terrifying. I don't recommend it, but being dead easiest thing you can do. Story 49. I don't have a story, but it's just some thoughts. I hope that's okay. My dad is about to die of cancer, and he has really been suffering. I hope so much that as he passes, he'll see something beautiful and feel peace, just like a lot of you described. I just really wonder, do we really see the afterlife? Or is it maybe some kind of biological process that makes you see those visions? No problem at all. Sharing thoughts, OP. Definitely appreciate it. Story 50. I attempted and nearly succeeded in unaliving myself a few years ago. The only thing I saw was a yellow cottage with a beautiful, overgrown flower garden. What was even more powerful was waking up with a strong sense that I got very stern talking to by someone. Very much a don't you dare do that again type of talking to. I also woke up with a strong feeling of duty, as if I have to be here for my loved ones. And that duty extended to people I hadn't met yet. Waking up with all that knocked the wanting to self-unalive thoughts right out of me. Literally like a switch flipped. I was still horrendously depressed, but self-unaliving was no longer an option whatsoever. Story 51, done this post in the past 12-year account. Left for dead in a hit and run that fractured my skull and broke my C4 through C6 vertebrae. Clinically dead for about 90 seconds is what I was told. There isn't anything. It's like describing color to a blind person. No tunnel of light, no choir of past family, no brimstone or terror. It's like asking someone what it's like before they're born. Story 52. When I was 15 and a half years old, I had a motorcycle permit and a small Honda that I rode daily. I was riding to high school on a back road and lost control and flew 20 feet over the handlebars. While I was in the air, time stood still and my life flashed before my eyes. Literally, my mind brought up these snapshots of my life one after the other. I can't tell you how many, but each one was very clear and recognizable. For example, one of the snapshots was my mom standing behind me, pulling up my pants, dressing me when I was 3 years old. Your life really does flash before your eyes. Forgot to add, ended up in the emergency room with a broken collarbone. Story 53, I drowned when I was 6 years old, 31 now in a pond, when I was left unattended by my parents and grandfather while fishing. Thankfully, my grandfather was somewhat nearby to notice I wasn't on the dock anymore. I remember the fear, agony, and taste of the water to this day, and still get that panic if I choke on my spit or drink. They didn't know how long I was gone for, but my grandfather said it took about a minute to bring me back after he found me under the dock. As for my experience from the other side, I remember little flashes of light shortly after my panic stopped and vision faded in the already dark water. I then felt numbness, then nothing. Then, of course, the pain and panic and choking of being revived on the dock was about just as bad as the drowning. I didn't even want to go fishing. The event and explained experience ignited religion in my parents, and they convinced me I went to hell, not heaven. I've been an atheist for years now, and I don't really have that fear of death anymore. Story 54. So, a friend of a friend from growing up in the neighborhood has been on drugs, meth and opiates, mostly, but probably whatever he could get forever. Just found out he's 3 months clean and fresh out of rehab. Seems to be doing great for the first time in over a decade. He's been brought back with Narcan over 10 times, and he's adamant he's seen the other side, and there's nothing there. Just blackness. A void. Story 55. I experienced a bunch of memories from past lives. I was in a coma, so I was out for like 3 weeks. It all sort of kicked off this crazy spiritual experience, When I, from an outside perspective, watched my body arch up off the hospital bed while they were using the paddles trying to resuscitate me. Story 56, nothing. 1 second you're alive, there's maybe a nanosecond of noise and light fading out. Then you're dead, and then you come back. I'll never forget my dad and one of the docs looking at me in the face and exclaiming, "Welcome back after my cardiac arrest." But I was confused AF. They had to explain to me what happened. There was no light, no heavenly angel, no out-of-body experience. You're alive, then you're not. Then you're alive again. Story 57, a pit of lava and fire, sort of, in a grid formation, like a massive tic-tac-toe board of fire. Monsters would come up from the pit and try and grab me. It was terrifying. I was walking along the grid looking for a way out. I was only 5 when this happened. Story 58. Not sure if I actually died, but a couple years ago on Thanksgiving night, I got up to take some heartburn medicine in the kitchen. I remember looking at the clock on the stove. It was 11:14. Then I got very dizzy, and the next thing I knew, I was getting up off the floor. No pain, just like I woke up from a pleasant sleep. No idea how I didn't hit my head on the hard floor. Notice the clock now said 11:40, so I really don't know what happened. But I definitely lost some time there. Story 59, I saw these dark shapes, which were never-ending and imposing on me. I had something heavy in my right hand to swing at them, but they kept coming. I was only 7 stone and had 4 nurses sitting on me. I managed to give 2 of them black eyes, fighting my way out of the black monsters. There was no light or tunnel, just dark monster shapes who were hard to cut through and endless. Story 60, had major surgery a few years back, and there was a period in which I felt myself standing in this infinitely white void. I recall just seeing my feet and then looking ahead but couldn't physically turn my head to see either side. I could only keep my head straight ahead, and even though this place was a white void with no visible windows, doors or walls, etc., it strangely still felt like a room. I still felt like myself too, but anything negative, like anger, anxiety, or fear or pain, was non-existent, and I had very limited memories I could recall back on. I can only remember feeling everything happening as it was being fully present in that place and being surrounded by white light and warmth. Then I woke up in the recovery room sometime later. I found out hours after waking up that I nearly died during surgery. All these years later, I still think about that place, wherever and whatever that was, and wonder what exactly happened. If it was a preview of what it's like to die, then I'm no longer afraid of death. Story 61, I made an attempt on my life back in 2017. I was surprised at how fast I crossed over. What struck me was the lack of sensations from my body. It was so peaceful. I left behind all my worldly troubles and I was just existing. I remember the twilight-looking sky and other people in the distance. When I was there, I remember feeling happy with being there, and that it was a familiar place. I felt like I had to go somewhere there, but I don't remember where that place is now. As I began moving towards where I knew I had to go, either I thought, or it was communicated to me, not ready yet. With that, the serene reality pulled away so fast and began to experience bodily sensation again. It was feeling like I was going down a roller coaster backwards while simultaneously being compressed over my entire body. As I began to feel like I couldn't take it anymore, I threw up. I blacked in my body. I knew where I was, and I couldn't believe I wasn't there anymore. All my inner turmoil came rushing back in contrast with the knowledge of where I had been. I've made my peace, and I know this life has its purpose. Story 62, I've died twice now, both during cardiac procedures. Only for a few minutes, but still. The first was 20-ish years ago. Everything was dark, and I just saw still water. Know the dark water from Stranger Things. Totally flipped my crap when I saw that. The second time was last week, actually. Same procedure. This time was different, though. It was so bright and all white. Everyone I've ever cared for was there waving and generously smiled at me. When I woke up, I was just effing sobbing. Last time compared to this time, I feel lighter. Less like the world is going to press me to death, and more like I can finally breathe. Story 63, I had the flu that developed into pneumonia with an infected packet inside my lung that required emergency surgery to remove. I made my peace with God going into the ER, but within 48 hours they had pumped 4 liters of pus out of my left lung. They removed 1R5 to 1/4 of the lung last week. I made my peace with God and passed out and awoke when they were sticking a hose in between my ribs to pump out the pus. It was 7 liters over 2 weeks with intense antibiotics and a quarantine because it was so aggressive. I was septic as my kidneys had almost shut down completely. I was peeing blood. I saw nothing but dreamed of my kids and my family when I was passed out before the emergency surgery. I cried thinking I was going to die at 43 and never hold my kids again since they live in Brazil when I woke up. Story 64. Not truly the same thing, but I have seizures sometimes. I don't usually remember anything, but the last one I had, I was literally just grabbing water from the fridge. Next thing I know, I'm lying in a grass field with a perfect blue sky, and there's a slight breeze. Kind of like the Microsoft background. I heard my dad saying my name, then snapped out of it, lying on the kitchen floor. So effing weird, man.